You didn't arrive here by accident. Perhaps there is a silence growing inside you, an empty space that remains even when everything on the outside seems in its place. You did what was expected. You built, sustained, provided, and yet something stirs deep within your soul, a calling you can't quite name. It's not a lack of gratitude. It's not ingratitude for the life you've built. It's something much deeper, something that begins to emerge when the persona can no longer hold the weight of your story. It is the self calling you home. Perhaps today, without fully realizing, you are crossing the threshold of midlife, not as a crisis, but as the beginning of a passage, a silent, intimate, and necessary passage. This video won't offer easy answers. It is an invitation to walk gently and bravely into the emptiness that is not failure, but a portal to what your soul has always known. You are not broken. You are becoming. You did everything right. You studied. You worked. You built a family, a career, stability. You made sacrifices. You carried the weight of responsibility. On the outside, your life seems in order, and yet something inside you whispers. It is a different kind of silence, not peace, not fulfillment, an emptiness that will not fade. You wake up, look around, and everything appears as it should be. But inside, there's a space you cannot fill. Perhaps you've asked yourself, is this a lack of gratitude, a loss of faith, a lack of motivation? Is there something I failed to achieve? But it's none of these. What's rising within you is not a defect. It's not a failure. It's the calling, Jung would call it, the calling of the self, the deep voice of your psyche, breaking through the years, beyond the masks, beyond the defenses, and now finally reaching you. For so long, your ego did what it had to do. It survived. It fulfilled expectations. It carried roles, responsibilities, obligations. It adapted to what life demanded, but the soul moves to a different rhythm. The psyche has seasons. And perhaps now, at 40, 50, 60 years old, you are crossing into a new season, the season of individuation. There are no clear signs on this path, no ready-made formulas, only this emptiness, this silent space inviting you to look within. What you feel is not laziness, not weakness, not some personal flaw. It is the beginning of the crossing. It is your soul asking to emerge. Until now, life was expansion. Now it calls for depth. Until now, it was about building on the outside. Now it is about finding yourself on the inside. Who are you, beyond the roles you've played? What parts of you were silenced to adapt? What remains unlived within you? This emptiness is not the end. It is the invitation. It is the self calling you to return to your center. Do not fear this silence. It did not come to destroy you. It came to reveal you, to return to you parts of yourself that were long dormant. True life does not end when outer success is achieved. True life begins when we dare to descend into the basement of the soul, to open doors long locked, to illuminate forgotten rooms. And there you find what was always yours, but the world never allowed you to embrace. It is in that quiet basement where your rebirth lives. You tried so hard. For years, maybe even decades, you carried what was expected. You held up the family. You held up your work. You held up the responsibilities. You put others first. You buried your own questions deep inside, like unopened letters kept locked away. But now something has shifted. The emptiness once drowned, out by the urgency of daily life, has begun to speak. And with it comes the quiet anguish of not knowing what to do with what you feel. Because what's surfacing is not something effort can resolve, not something that can be organized with plans, goals, or strategies. It's a calling that asks for a different kind of courage. The courage to look, the courage to feel, the courage to descend, because the path ahead is no longer one of expansion, but of descent, descent into what was left behind, into what was silenced, into what was sacrificed, descent into the shadow. Jung said, the first half of life is devoted to expansion, the second half to inwardness. The psyche follows this cycle. The ego, which once needed to grow, achieve, and establish itself, now finds little meaning in external conquests. The soul demands a return. It asks for integration. It asks you to turn inward. And as you look inward, questions arise. Who am I beyond the roles I've played? What parts of me did I have to bury to survive? What wounds still carry the weight of unresolved stories? Where have I abandoned myself to survive? These are not questions for quick answers. They are portals. Portals leading you to the core of your being. And when we try to avoid this calling, the suffering grows louder. Many, upon feeling this discomfort, seek to quiet it through distraction. They buy more. They pursue new relationships. They drown themselves in work. They numb themselves with subtle, familiar addictions. But the more we attempt to silence the soul, the louder it calls. And the soul's cry isn't always audible. It often emerges as unexplained fatigue, as anxiety that won't leave, as a sadness without clear cause, as family conflicts, as physical symptoms that seem to have no medical explanation. The self does not give up. It keeps calling, pushing you gently or painfully toward individuation, because there in the inward journey lies what you've always sought, wholeness, the reunion of all the lost pieces along the way. To validate this emptiness is the first step, not to resist it, not to blame yourself for feeling it, to understand that it is not an ending. It is the birth of a new phase, the phase where your inner truth finally begins to be lived. Life no longer asks you to build higher levels upon your house of youth. Now the invitation is different, to descend into the soul's basement, to open the locked doors, to bring light into what was once forgotten, and there to reclaim what was always yours, your true self waiting to be born. This is where many stumble. When the calling of individuation emerges, the ego's first response is resistance, because the unknown feels threatening. And so begins a silent cycle of escape, compensation, and emotional illness that traps countless people in hidden suffering. The ego was trained to survive through adaptation. When the soul calls for transformation, the ego interprets it as a threat of annihilation. And so, unconscious defense mechanisms arise. Denial. There's nothing wrong. I'm fine. Rationalization. It's just normal stress. Compensation. Chasing quick pleasures to numb the discomfort. Shopping, addictions, superficial relationships. Projection. Blaming others for one's own internal emptiness. These strategies may work for years, but the psychological cost accumulates, and then the body begins to speak, because the unconscious cannot be silenced forever. It finds indirect ways to express what has long been buried: persistent anxiety, panic attacks, existential depression, not triggered by external losses but by inner emptiness, chronic insomnia, diffuse physical symptoms, muscle pain, headaches, digestive problems. These aren't diseases in the conventional sense. They are symbolic manifestations, signs of an unresolved inner conflict that has reached the surface. As Bessel van der Kolk says, the body keeps the score. The body carries what the mind has been unable to integrate. And here lies the subtle danger. When the avoidance persists long enough, it no longer feels like avoidance. It becomes identity. I'm just an anxious person. My life has always been like this. I don't have time to think about these things. The resistance turns into a chronic false self, a functional character, but disconnected from the soul. Jung warned, nothing has a stronger influence psychologically on their environment and especially on their children than the unlived life of the parent, but also that which we do not bring to consciousness appears in our lives as fate. The emotional suffering that arises after 40 is not weakness. It is the psychological birth of a new inner identity, a labor of becoming. The first act of courage is not to change your life, not to make immediate decisions, not to look for quick solutions. The first act is to validate the conflict, to recognize that it exists, that it is real, that it has meaning. And perhaps the most honest question at this point is not, what should I do? But rather, if I were not afraid, what part of me would be trying to be born right now? Because that is how the soul speaks, in whispers, in tremors, in possibilities not yet fully defined. To ignore this movement is like ignoring a dormant volcano. The pressure doesn't disappear because you refuse to see it. It only builds, until one day it can no longer be contained. But if you have the courage to face it, to listen, to allow this contained energy to be expressed with awareness, what once seemed like destruction becomes fertile ground. New internal landscapes arise. New meanings unfold. Because it's not an ending. It's the beginning of a land that has always existed within you, waiting to be inhabited. Most people live within the field of reason. They think, plan, execute. Their lives are filled with tasks, lists, responsibilities unfolding like an endless thread of duties. And so they pass through life without hearing what their soul is whispering. But the call of individuation does not speak to the rational mind. It doesn't use common language or logic. The unconscious expresses itself differently. It speaks through symbols, through sensations, through nighttime images, through emotions that often feel disproportionate and inexplicable. And for this reason, most people do not know how to listen, not because they lack desire, but because they were never taught how to hear this other language. Jung said that the psyche is a living system of self-regulation. When important parts of ourselves, wounds, gifts, desires, traumas, are ignored, the unconscious tries to compensate. It creates symbolic images. It produces recurring dreams. It generates strange synchronicities. It stirs emotions that seem to have no clear cause. And often what we call a problem is, in fact, the soul's attempt to be heard. But there is a movement that can be learned, a movement of amplification, not repression, not rushing to interpret, but allowing oneself to listen deeply. When a symbol arises, don't try to translate it right away. Contemplate it. Let it speak to you over time. Reflect on its multiple meanings. Give it space to breathe inside you. For example, if a dream brings the image of abandonment, the question isn't simply who abandoned you. The real question is, where inside of me have I abandoned myself? Where am I still disconnected from parts of my own being? Many, anxious? For quick answers, get lost here. They search for manuals, formulas, definite interpretations. They want to know, what exactly does this mean? What should I do now? But the unconscious doesn't work like a mathematical equation. It moves like the wind through a dense forest. Sometimes gentle, sometimes fierce, but always mysterious. As the poet Rainer Maria Rilke once wrote, live the questions now. Perhaps you will then gradually, without noticing it, live along some distant day answer. And so the practice of inner listening becomes essential. A simple practice, but one of profound transformation. A journal of listening. Dreams. Write them down, even fragments. Give each dream a symbolic title, like chapters of an unknown book. Intense emotions. When you feel anger, sadness, or fear, gently ask, what is this emotion trying to show me about myself? Synchronicities. Pay attention to strange coincidences. They are not random. They may be subtle clues offered by the unconscious. Symbolic expression. Allow yourself to create. Write, paint, sculpt, dance, articulate whatever arises symbolically. Because symbolic expression activates a dialogue with the unconscious that words often cannot fully reach. Over time, these small records build a map, an emotional cartography uniquely yours, revealing inner territories that have long been asleep. And little by little, the soul begins to reveal itself, shedding light where there was once only shadow. It is like walking through a dense forest at night, holding only a small lantern. You cannot see the entire path, but with each step the light reveals just enough for the next. The soul does not demand that you see everything, only that you trust and take the next conscious step. We live in a culture obsessed with youth, speed, and early productivity. A culture that teaches us to measure our worth by how soon we succeed, as if the value of life lies in achieving as much as possible, as quickly as possible. But the psyche does not follow the clock of the world. The soul has its own time, a deep, secret time, a time that often does not bear fruit until long after. The leaves of youth have fallen, just as there are trees that take decades to produce their first fruit. There are souls that reveal their true essence only after years of silent growing. At 40, 50, 60 years old, sometimes later, many begin, for the first time, to produce the true fruits of their existence. In the first half of life, the soul's work is structural. It builds identity. It forms roots. It learns how to survive and function in the outer world. It is invisible work, but essential. And throughout that building, unseen nutrients accumulate. Wounds that taught compassion. Losses that taught detachment. disappointments that revealed what was false, silences that matured the inner gaze. None of this was wasted time. It was the underground water feeding the roots, preparing the soil for what is now beginning to emerge. Jung saw the second half of life as the time of integration, of reconciliation with one's own history, of uniting opposites, reason and intuition, strength and vulnerability, pain and wisdom. It is the time when the self moves to the center, not as an abstract ideal, but as a living experience of wholeness. Yet many torture themselves with feelings of being late. What have I done with my life? I should have done this earlier. Now it's too late. But in the language of individuation, there is no such thing as being late. Here is only readiness, the exact moment when the ego has softened enough to allow the soul to rise. The defenses that once protected now make space for something deeper to unfold. Many only access their true vocation, spirituality, or creativity at 50, 60, or 70 years old, because only then is the ego flexible enough not to obstruct the self. Only then can the deeper layers of the soul finally breathe. To embrace this, maturation, a simple practice, helps. A meditation of inner acceptance. Close your eyes. Visualize a fruit-bearing tree. See its deep, invisible roots strong beneath the earth. Notice how these roots quietly sustain the visible life above. With each breath, silently repeat, I allow myself to bear fruit in my own time. This small act shifts your attention away from external comparisons and back into the sacred rhythm of your soul. Because some trees bear fruit early, but their fruit is fragile and short-lived. Others take decades. But when they finally bloom, they offer dense, nourishing fruit, enough to feed not only themselves but many others around them. True life does not race against time, it matures with it. And so at this quiet point in the journey, you finally understand the true essence of everything you've lived. It was never about winning. It was never about achieving something out. There, it was always about returning to yourself, returning to what was always silently waiting within you. Now every beat of your heart carries the memory of the path you've walked. Every breath holds the rhythm of your soul that has learned to trust. The weight that once crushed you has become your ground, your root, your solid base where your existence can now rest without effort. There's no longer a need to resist life's flow. Life continues with its cycles, birth, loss, transformation, but you remain anchored, because you know that even as the waves rise, there is a center in you that does not break. This center wasn't given to you. It was built through the silent, courageous work of crossing your own shadow, of listening to the voices long hidden, of holding space for emptiness until it finally became fertile. Now, as you walk, you carry a new kind of lightness, not the naive lightness of someone who has never known weight, but the mature lightness of one who carried it and learned to release it with wisdom. This is the true maturity of the soul, to allow yourself to be whole with what is, without forcing change where readiness has not yet arrived, without blaming yourself for what could not be, without demanding from yourself an impossible ideal of perfection. Here, at the end of this passage, which is always the beginning of another, you remain present, whole, aligned with the secret rhythm of your own soul, and even without needing words, something inside you now whispers with deep certainty, I crossed. I remained. I embraced. I became. I am finally home. You are not broken. You are silently, irreversibly, completely whole. And here your true rebirth establishes itself, not with noise, but with the peace of one who has finally returned to themselves. If this message touched something inside you, feel free to subscribe and stay connected. Share your reflections in the comments. Your experience may resonate with someone else who quietly carries the same questions. And if you feel this journey may help others, you can gently share it. This space is here for those who are ready to return to themselves in their own time, in their own way.